welcome to Vicky's Fabrics. I am Miley Bloxam and we are doing Paradise Block 1. The first thing I'm going to do is talk to you a little bit about cutting 3 1/4 inch and 3 3/8 inch. Okay, so I am using my Creative Grids ruler. I tend to cut in fourths. So I have my width of fabric cut in fourths. You're not going to have to worry about this because if you are using a kit, you have a much smaller piece of fabric. If you are using the yardage like I am, you're going to want to cut a piece that's 7 inches before you start cutting these smaller pieces. Okay, so you just saw me square up and trim the edge of that piece of fabric. So when we are using these patterns, you're going to be cutting a lot of pieces that are 3 1/4 inches. 3 1/4 inches are used for these triangles on the square in a square. 3 1/4 inches are used for your half square triangles. Okay. You are going to be also doing 3 1/8. So 3 1/8 inch are going to be used for your squares that are cut to do the triangles on your flying geese. So what I do when I'm going to cut 3 1/8 is I start by lining up my fabric with the 3 1/4 line. And then because I'm a right-handed cutter, I'm going to slide it to the left 1/8 of an inch, and that's my 3 1/4. Okay, so I start, this is why I love this ruler, with this white line that I know is in the middle, and it's 3 1/4. For 3 1/8, I'm going to slide it over so that my fabric is smaller and make that 3 1/8 inch cut. There are also times that you're going to be doing 3 3/8. Again, 3 3/8 is 1/8 larger. So I'm going to start with my 3 1/4, and then I'm going to slide it over so that fabric is bigger, and that is my 3 3/8. So again, this is why I love this ruler, because I know exactly where my 3 1/4, 3 1/8, and 3 3/8 are. If you're a left-handed cutter, and Creative Grids does do left-handed rulers, you're just going to be sliding it in the opposite direction from me, okay? But this is a good reference, an easy way. Start by going to 3 1/4, make your piece smaller for 3 1/8. Start at 3 1/4, make your piece larger for 3 3/8, okay? So let's get into the meat of this. The first thing we are going to do is 2 different colored flying geese. Now we have the intro tutorial where we go through the specifics of the flying goose. I'm going to be doing it pretty much again through each of these videos, but going much faster, okay? Because you could always go back to that first video and reference what we did. So when we do flying geese, we start with a 5 1/2 inch square and a 3 1/8 inch square. You're going to take the 5 1/2 inch square and cut it into fourths on the diagonal to make large triangles. You're going to take the 3 1/8 inch square and cut it in half to make small triangles. Okay, so you're going to start here. You're going to line up your bottoms. Sew up one seam, press that open before sewing the other side, and when you press this, you're going to press this in the opposite direction. So the way I have this is pushed out to one side and then pushed into the other, okay, so that the seams follow in the same direction. From here, you're going to square because these are oversized pieces. You're going to take your square and a square ruler, and you're going to drop the center of that ruler, the picot is what I call it, on the point. You're going to line up your black lines on the triangle. You're going to make your first cut. You're going to turn that around, drop that into the corner, and use your second ruler to measure out 4.5 inch by 2.5 inch. Okay, so you're going to be making 4 of this flying goose, which is the purple in the middle. This is fabric number 4 and fabric number 1. And then you're going to be doing 4 of these, which is fabric number 2 and fabric number 7. And then you will be sewing these together this way so that the purple is on the top and the blue is on the bottom. Okay, so you're going to be sewing them here. So you'll be making 4 of these. Okay, so that's the first piece of this block. The second piece of this block is we're going to start with half square triangles. You're going to have half square triangles that are 2 colors. This one is fabric number 5 and fabric number 2. Fabric number 5 and fabric number 2. You're going to lay the squares on top of each other. These are 3¼ inch squares. You're going to mark the center. You're going to sew 1/4 inch on either side and then cut them in half. And when you press this open, you get that. Again, I'm going to use my square and a square trim tool, the 2½ inch square. I'm going to drop that on the midline, and I'm going to square one corner, flip it, and trim the other side to get 2½ inch by 2½ inch half square triangles. You will have 8 of these, okay? So you're going to take 8 of those and the 2½ inch squares of fabric number 2 and fabric number 9, and then you're going to put them together in a 4-patch configuration. You know what? I'm actually going to square this one. We're going to square that up. Live and in person. No, we're videoing. So we are going to be making 4 of these 4 patches. Okay, so usually what I do when I do these 4 patches is I take all the fabrics and I lay them out. And after I lay them out according to the pattern, okay, I make sure it's correct because you don't want to be sewing all these together and then they be in the wrong order. So I have the 2 sides with the fabric number 5 touching the fabric number 9, the blue touching the purple, and the white sides touching each other. Okay, these are all fabric number 2. I will lay these out one set, and then I will lay all the other 3 blocks on top of it. So I'll have 4, 4, 4, 4 before I start sewing these together. Now, this is just a me thing. You do not have to do this, but I find that in order to get better corners in the middle, when I sew a 4 patch, I like to take these and sew from the center out. This one, I will sew from the center out. And this way, I know that when I'm sewing from the center out, the center is lined up in a straight line. If weirdness happens on this end, I might trim anyway, but the center is going to be even. When I press these, I'm going to press away from the seamed piece, right? So my half square triangle is a piece with a seam. So when I press away from that, these are flatter. Those centers are together, and then I'm going to line them up so that seam butts before doing my last seam. And I get pretty exact corners. Okay, so at the end of this exercise, you will have 4 of these made with half square triangles and 2.5-inch squares. Our last component for this block is our square in a square. And again, we've done tutorials on all of these in the Paradise intro that goes a little slower. Okay, so take your time, watch that video. It's a great little primer for what we're doing. We're going to start with a square in a square block. Now, this is a 3 1/8-inch square. This is the main component for getting a good 1/4-inch seam on this block, is this 3 3/8-inch square. You're going to start by folding that in half, marking, and opening it up. Now, the corners here start with a 3 1/4-inch square. You have 2 of them. You're going to cut it in half to make 4 triangles. Okay? When I put these together, I fold my triangle in half. I put that folded edge right along the center mark. I line up the side and I open it up. And I'm going to sew a proper 1/4-inch seam. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Fold this, line it up, and open it up. Sew a proper 1/4-inch seam. When I'm here, I'm going to fold these, mark my corners, or mark my center, and lay my triangles the same way. Lining up on the side, putting that in the corner before sewing my 1/4-inch seams. Okay? These are going to form a oversized piece. You're going to have more than a 1/4-inch on these edges. Now, I'm leaving this loose so you can kind of see what I'm going to do next. When you take your square in a square ruler and you're going to place this on here, okay, I'm going to adjust this slightly so you can see what I'm doing. There you go. Perfect. What you can see is this black line, the horizontal and the vertical, line up exactly with the corners of that inner square. Okay? If your square is too small, I'm going to show you kind of that way. You saw me shift that. These two line up, but this is too small. This means that you need to take a bigger seam allowance. I'm sorry, take a smaller seam allowance so that this square becomes bigger. If your piece is in here and this inner square is too big, that means you need to take a bigger bite in your seam allowances so that square becomes smaller. Okay, so that's how you adjust to get a good square in a square using this method. So I've already taken this and squared this piece, but you'll see when I drop my ruler into this square, the black lines, horizontal and vertical, pretty much fall in those corners, and I have a 1/4-inch seam allowance all the way around my square. Okay. So when we have all our components, which is our square in our square, our 4 patch corners, and our flying geese, you're going to be putting this together like a 9 patch. You are going to have your flying geese, and again, I lay these out before I start sewing. So I'm going to put my flying geese sides, and when I put my 4 patches, we want the purples, the fabric 9, towards the center. And you've got block 1 for Paradise Block of the Month.